Some of the book pushes back against a conclusion that many people have drawn from the literature in cognitive psychology and behavioral economics, which is that people are just boobs. They're, what do you expect? We're hunter-gatherers at heart, out of time. We're inched into a modern civilization, but hunter-gatherers, they didn't have to use Bayes' theorem. They just had to avoid becoming lunch for lions. Now, although I find the research on human judgment and decision making, including all those fallacies, to be fascinating and relevant, I don't think the right conclusion is that we're just a bag of fallacies and quick, thoughtless heuristics. We wouldn't have done what we've done as a species if that were true. And so I actually went back to studies of hunter-gatherers. Now, these are surviving hunter-gatherers, but still they give at least a glimpse into the kind of lifestyle that our species experienced as our brains were being shaped by natural selection. And this is with the help of a friend, Louis Liebenberg, who has spent his life working with the hunters of the Kalahari Desert, the San. And he has written his theories that our scientific abilities as a species emerged from the cognitive demands of tracking, namely interpreting fragmentary evidence like hoof prints and bent twigs and bits of spoor left behind, fur and saliva and urine, to hypothesize what kind of animal must have left them behind. And that involves distinguishing correlation from causation. It involves Bayesian reasoning. As just a simple example, let's say there's a track in the dirt, and the dirt's not very soft, so the track is ambiguous. It could have been one species or another, but they know that one is pretty prevalent in the area, the other is pretty rare. They'll go with the prevalent species. That is taking into account base rates, Bayesian priors. They do that. They are Bayesian when their livelihood depends on it.
So that seems to dispel the more cynical view that it's only the top 0.1% of intelligent humans who are making the vaccines and the smartphones and rocket ships.
Yeah, that is right. And that is one of the messages. Later in the book, raise the question of the relationship between intelligence in the IQ sense and rationality in the sense of being a good Bayesian, avoiding logical fallacies, distinguishing correlation from causation, avoiding traps like the sunk cost fallacy, namely pursuing an activity because of what you've invested in it so far, as opposed to what the expected returns are going forward, and all the other ones that are a staple of the judgment and decision-making literature. And the answer is, they are correlated. On average, smarter people are more rational. Not always. Smart people can come to irrational conclusions, and duller people can come to rational ones. In general, they're correlated. One way in which, by the way, they're not so correlated is in what the psychologist Keith Stanovich has written a book on called the myside bias. That is motivated reasoning where you decide what you want to be true and you jigger your thought processes to lead you there. And what you want to be true might be what puts you in a good light, might also be what puts your tribe, your coalition, your religion, your political party, the best possible light. That's why it's called the myside bias. And what Stanovich has found is that this is one bias that is not correlated with intelligence. Smart people can deploy their brain power to come up with ingenious arguments for what they always believed was true in the first place.
So to frame this in terms of nature and nurture, on the nature side, there are both optimistic and pessimistic views for how rationality may have evolved. So on the optimistic side, you have a nice line in the book that says something like, if someone deludes themselves into thinking they can nourish themselves from dirt, they're going to be soon outcompeted by people who are properly nourishing themselves. So we have some natural selection for rationality in that sense. But then on the other hand, it seems like if you can outdeceive others by spinning a story to say what you want to be true, even if it's not actually true, then there's also going to be a selection pressure in that direction towards irrationality.
Yes, and I think it's an insightful and necessary analysis to be aware of the ways in which rationality would, and in some cases might not be selected for. The most obvious one is that reality is a really powerful selection pressure. That is, you might think that the cheetah is a rabbit, and it might be comforting, and you can think of all kinds of reasons why people would rather believe it. But if they did believe it, they'd be worse off. Reality is a really important thing to be aware of, as are cause and effect and logic and all of those ruthless laws that govern the universe. There used to be there's a kind of a nerdy joke that in the following a campaign to get people to obey the speed limit, it said 70 miles per hour, it's not just a good idea, it's the law. And then someone had a bumper sticker that said 186,272 miles per second. It's not just a good idea, it's the law. It's not just a good reality, cause and effect, logic, statistics is not just a good idea, it's the law. It's the way the universe works. But you, Adam, you did identify some ways in which we might expect people not to be perfect logical and statistical reasoners. An obvious one is just the computational demands. I think they tend to be overestimated. The idea that we always have to think in a split second because there might be a predator lurking in the bush, I think is a kind of a stereotype. Hunter-gatherers spend a lot of time in cogitation. But nonetheless, it is true that the demands of computation can grow exponentially, that knowledge about the world is uncertain in the best of circumstances, let alone before we had science and math and record keeping. So there has to be some of what Herb Simon called satisficing. That is, rather than deploying all the brain power you have to come up with the optimal solution, and with all the time that it takes, being lost in thought for several hours, you come up with a solution that is good enough, that surpasses some reasonable threshold. So there is that. And you mentioned another one, namely in a social world, especially a world in which, unlike the one where we live in now, where we feel we're entitled to objectively correct answers to cosmic questions. How old is the universe? Or what happened in the White House during the deliberations over Vietnam? Or what happens in corporate boardrooms, where we nowadays take it for granted that there are scientific answers to questions. What is the cause of disease and misfortune? Why do some people get sick and other people don't? We feel the answer's out there, we can find it, and we should align our beliefs with the best truth we can find. But here's a case where you don't even have to go to hunter-gatherers. You can just think of human experience until recently, and still in lots of parts of the world, where you just don't know, you can't find out. You're not part of the scientific community. And so their people's beliefs are more aligned with what makes them admired and respected within their community, which of course is also a selection pressure. Outcasts and loose cannons and oddballs are at a disadvantage as well. So there's another selection pressure, especially in domains where things aren't just there to be seen by the naked eye, but they require long chains of inference and trust in experts. There, the orientation to reality might be superseded by the orientation to be a hero in your tribe.